Hey dancers, welcome back to the Confident Dancer YouTube channel or podcast if you're listening there. My name is Kirsten and today I have a part two, a second interview with my friend Melody Mennite, who is a former principal dancer with the Houston Ballet. She had an incredible 23-season career there. We actually did an interview a couple of weeks ago where she shared a lot about her journey, the ins and outs of it, some incredible pieces of wisdom she learned along the way from having such a prolific and long career. So I really recommend that you watch that video or listen to the podcast if you haven't yet, because Melody is not only such a likable person, but she's such an important person to learn from, I think, for all dancers. So please go watch that if you haven't already. And also enjoy today's video, because what we're doing today in this conversation is Melody and I unpacked one idea that she mentioned in our last interview that we put a bookmark in and we're like, ooh, this needs to be talked about. Let's expand on this in another conversation. And I'm so grateful she was down to do that. It's very generous of her. So what we're talking about in our conversation today is the concept of agency and how dancers can embody a sense of agency in how they think, how they feel, the choices you make about what kind of artist you're going to be, what you want and what you are and aren't willing to tolerate. Basically a sense of agency over your own mind, life, and career as a dancer. And I wish this didn't feel like such a revolutionary concept. At least I can say it has felt like that for me to hear Melody talk about this, because it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, but I hear so few dancers vocalizing it. And I think the reason why is because, especially in pre-professional and professional environments, we're often given this message kind of subconsciously and sometimes very overtly that we're just supposed to be quiet and do what we're told. And to a certain extent, that is not necessarily wrong or malicious. However, it can get to a really unhealthy extreme where dancers feel they have no autonomy over their own bodies, their own minds, and their own careers. We're made to feel sometimes like the only way to be successful is to really just shut up, do what you're told, play the game, and that's how you win. Be what the authority figures want, don't cause a disruption, and just be a blank canvas, basically. So we really dive into this concept and poke some holes in it and start to talk about, okay, even when it's really hard and you feel like you are so replaceable and you do have so much to lose as a dancer, how do you start to embody a sense of agency in your own life, mind, and journey in order to make authentic and healthy decisions for yourself and even protect yourself from abuse, which is, it is a topic that does come up in our conversation, just so you're aware. It doesn't get graphic or anything, but yeah, we really dive into this because it needs to be talked about more, and it is a topic that I'm personally so passionate about. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I hope you learn so much from it. I think there really is so much to learn, and I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. So thank you for being here. Thank you so much to Melody for sharing really boldly and vulnerably about her own thoughts and experiences. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Because today we're talking about how smooth transition. She is smooth. We're going to talk about how to find a sense of agency in your training and career in this crazy dance world that often not only doesn't encourage it, but kind of actively squashes it sometimes, in my opinion, with the whole like, you're replaceable undercurrent or overcurrent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know so many dancers feel like they just need to conform. They need to obey and do what they're told, comply, so that they can play the game and be successful, especially if you're trying to get into a professional company and rise in the ranks. And I just absolutely love what you said in our last conversation about how important having that sense of agency over your career, your dancing, your life is so important. And
It is.
I was over here like punching the air with excitement about what you said, so we have to talk about it more.
Yes.
I'd love to start by asking you about what having agency means to you.
Yeah. Um, choice is just the first word that comes to mind when I think of agency. The ability and the freedom and the right for me to choose um, things for myself, whether it's to
Mhm.
do with my body, whether it's to do with what environment I'm in, with how I'm spoken to, how I'm treated, what I participate in and what I don't. It can go a lot of places, what I put in my body, what I don't. There's it
Yeah.
agency, I think, is just kind of like our ownership over our own selves,
Mhm.
like across the board. And and that gets in dance, the lines get really blurred. I think one, because we're really young, and when we're
Mhm.
really young, we establish our agency when we're young. When we're toddlers, we start developing autonomy and saying no and figuring out, like, pushing back against, like, this is what my mom says to do or my teacher says to do, but I can say no or I can say yes, and like kind of trying to start understanding our own instincts and cues and preferences. And when that is, I'm just going backwards to try to like paint a
Mhm.
picture even for
Yeah.
myself and how I kind of saw this go awry for me and where I see it go awry, I think, for a lot of people and dancers. Um, if that is fostered healthfully, then I know how to function in the world in a way where I have um, not necessarily compliance, but what is it called when we're going to have a hard time with words today. You're going to have to help me.
That's
When
okay.
you come to the table and I want something and you want something
Yeah.
and what's the word?
You negotiate, you
Yes.
compromise.
Compromise. I was like, it's another
Compromise.
C. So
Yes.
if your sense of agency and your sense of autonomy is fostered at a developmental age appropriately, then you learn to compromise, but you learn to move from a place of self, like, security and like knowing yourself, knowing what your preferences are, how you feel safe, when you don't feel safe, how to speak to that. These are all just kind of rudimentary human things
Yes.
that should, I'm going to say should, because
Mhm.
should in the way of like the healthiest human organism, right? That
Yeah.
should be fostered. Um, and instead, we're talking a lot about ballet on this podcast, but you could look at it in a lot of different systems, even in family systems. Instead, what we see a lot of in our culture today is the value on compliance
Mhm.
over not for everyone, but I think sort of just more in general when it comes to systems and organizations, it is more valuable to be compliant than
Yeah.
it is to move from a sense of authenticity. And that's really dangerous.
Mhm.
It's a really dangerous setup for everyone, actually. So the reason that it's very dangerous is because if you are not looking out for yourself, not in a way that's selfish, that's like, I'm going to just do whatever I want and step on everyone else,
Mhm.
but from a place of like truth within yourself where you are taking care of yourself ultimately. Um, if you're not moving from that place, you are very vulnerable to abuse. You are
Oh,
very
yeah.
susceptible to moving away from your own core, your own instincts, your own safety. Um, and so when your center or your agency is kind of taken from you and you're instead looking to someone else's compass to maybe please whoever's in the front of the room, say in ballet, for example,
Mhm.
or whoever has the most power, then it flips over into that compliance, and we can see a lot of health issues in people.
Yeah.
We can see a lot of injury because people are no longer listening to their bodies. They're no longer listening to their cues of what their bodies need. I think of, for me, and you can come at it from a lot of different angles, but for me, I understand agency from a very embodied perspective. Um, because our minds
Mhm.
have layers to them. And one of them, I was just listening to a podcast about this today, so we should talk about that a little bit too. And
Mhm.
it had a woman on it who just wrote a book called, I think it's called Healing from the Bullied Brain,
Hmm.
or something about the bullied brain, I think is her Instagram account actually. And she talks about like the neurological changes and essentially damage to our brains from the setup of us having our agency taken away and being
Yeah.
treated in all of these different ways and told what our truth is and what's true about us. And
Yeah.
often that's considered like motivating, but it's actually not a good way to motivate a human.
No,
So I feel like I just went to like several different branches that we
it
could
was awesome.
revisit. But I think that like the elements of it that like I understand and that I've gone into that have helped me to regain my sense of agency are embodiment,
Hmm.
um, education on understanding what abusive behavior looks like.
Yeah.
Um, Bullying is a really important term
Hmm.
to learn about, I think, in this day and age, because there's a bullying model of teaching and coaching that is like kind of old school, maybe we would say, but is widely accepted as necessary.
Yes.
And that is not supported by any research for mental health, for physical peak performance, for sports medicine.
Yeah.
Nothing supports that model as effective. The only thing that research says is that that is highly damaging to human
Hmm.
brains, to human bodies, to health over a lifespan, to lifespan itself. So I feel like the education on um, just on like what it is to be treated with respect and what it looks like when you're not, and what that does to your body and to your brain and to yourself. I think that's really an important piece when we're talking about why autonomy and agency is important, everywhere, but especially in dance. Then you've got this embodiment piece, and then I feel like there's a third piece in here that I wanted to talk about, but they're all kind of like mashed up in my head. So I'm sure it'll
Yeah.
pop out
Yeah, it
at some
totally
point in our
will.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just eating all of this up because you're so right. What I've seen in my work with dancers when I'm coaching someone individually is I can tell very quickly if someone has come from a whole background, especially from early adolescence, childhood, whether it was in their family or in ballet. I can tell if they were taught in an extremely fear-based environment where it's like an authoritarian power structure. You just
Yeah.
do what I tell you to do, and there are no questions allowed. You don't ask. That's just how it is. And especially I see in the ballet world, I've experienced this. I'm sure you have too, where there can also be not only that authoritarian way of teaching, but also quite a bit of like narcissism at the front of the room where it turns very manipulative and the person is wanting to maintain this dominance over the people dancing for them. And so they'll display a lot of erratic behavior. Their standards will change. They'll say, do this. The dancer will try to do that. Why did you do that? Things
Yeah.
like that. And all of these things really cause a dancer, a human, in order to exist in that space, you have to separate from yourself.
Mhm.
And that's why I like how you're talking about embodiment. I'd love to get into that more because,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like what I've seen is the way it manifests in conversation when I'm coaching someone is um, the dancers don't actually know what they think. They don't actually know what they feel. And they can, we get there, but
Yeah.
they've practiced so much separation because they've had to separate from themselves and just follow whatever someone else says, that
Yes. Yeah.
they're way more comfortable being separated and being like, I don't know, you tell me what to do, than
Yes.
to go inwards and be honest about here's how I actually feel. Here's what I actually think.
Yeah.
Here's what I would like to change. And that often is hard to even bring up when you've come from a background like that, because you just think, oh, I can't bring anything up. I can't step
Right.
and I can't change.
Right.
Very sad.
Right. And what you're describing with separating from yourself is called dissociation,
Hmm.
in psychological terms. I
Yeah.
mean, it could be many things, but it's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
And, and so the third thing did pop out as you were talking. The
Haha.
second you said narcissism, actually, the other thing that I think is really important is the concept of dehumanization, because you can't treat someone abusively. I think it's important to use the proper terminology here. I know
Yeah.
some people might be like, what, abuse? Did you get punched in the face? Like, it doesn't matter. Abuse is less than respectful human like behavior.
Mm.
So we are equals as humans, and power structures kind of mess with that. And you can get a lot of ego and narcissism and someone's own issues going on. And it creates an abusive situation and environment that's tolerated because someone holds all the power.
Mhm.
Um, but this idea of being treated as an object, this is why I think like the first step for us in ballet to like collectively, not just it's going to take everyone. It's not just
Yeah.
going to take us. We
Yeah.
can only change ourselves. We can only like, navigate our own landscape and then use our voices, but it's going to take everyone because it's a systemic thing.
Mhm.
But we have to rehumanize dancers. We
Yeah.
have to. And I think the language, oh, this is so hard for me as I'm doing a lot more coaching now and teaching. Um, we're set up, you can hear it in the language from the beginning of stepping into studios. We think it's like so artistic that we say, you are the canvas and the choreographer is the painter. No, I'm a human. I'm sorry. I'm not an object. I'm a
Mm.
person. And if I'm a canvas and you're painting on me, I don't have choice. I don't
Mhm.
get to say, that hurts. And I know that it's subconscious, right? Like all of this stuff, survival mechanisms subconsciously kick in to keep us safe. So I'm not like blaming any one of us that have participated in this kind of thing, but we have to look at it. We have to look at how we're perpetuating this dehumanization from the beginning with what we're saying to students, what we've internalized. If you're being called a violin or a canvas, like it might sound poetic, but actually there's more to it than that. You're being told that you don't have a voice.
Mhm.
And that's not okay. You know,
Um,
it's it's just a really pretty way of saying shut up and do what you're told. And that
We're
is
laughing, but I
dangerous.
could cry about it. I know what you're
I
talking
know. I know. And I don't, and I like want to pull in specific examples because I
about.
feel like there's just stuff we've all heard and we're all like, oh, that's so true. And there's truth to it. And the process of like learning ballet and being created on and all of this, there's so much beauty to it. There's so much magic to it. We have to be very careful that we don't put people in that narcissistic throne, that we don't put the people who are creating or the people who are teaching or the people who are leading or directing or whatever, we don't set them up to be these like godlike figures because again, very dangerous.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous to make anyone above or below someone when it comes to value.
Mm.
And so that's our third I'm doing this like
Hello.
thing. So I have like a placeholder in my brain. Our third branch is this like we have to rehumanize everyone really, but because it's a top-down thing and we're talking about power, the people who are usually dehumanized are the people who have less power inherently in a
Yes.
system. So that's why I'm saying we need to rehumanize dancers. We need to rehumanize ourselves, no matter what position we're in, whether we find ourselves right now as a director, as a choreographer, as a dancer, as a student, as a parent, whatever. We have to re-find our own humanity like first and
Yeah.
understand what that means, what rights we carry with that, what our responsibility is to how to treat other humans.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's super foundational, and that for me, I really started that learning deeply when I started doing self-compassion work from someone named Kristen Neff, who did research out of University of Texas in Austin, where you are.
Hey.
Yeah, she's awesome. But
Awesome.
her work talks a lot about how we're so able to give compassion and
Mhm.
like all of these like rights, like in the innate value that humans hold, right? Like we're able to treat others very easily with this code of like a compassionate lens and like hold their humanity, but it's really hard to give that to ourselves. And so
Yeah.
there's a really hard path in there of like what have I internalized that's made me not see myself as worthy of that kind of
Yeah.
compassion and treatment, and how do I talk to myself when I make
Mhm.
mistakes, and so all of this is, I think, reclaiming your agency in a system like ballet. It is not go and journal every day and you'll be fine. Like it's a very complex thing to
It is.
deconstruct and rebuild.
Yeah.
Um, so this is going to be like a multifaceted and like a conversation that's going to need to happen over time. But I
Yes.
do think humanization is like at the core. Like how are you being treated? How are you treating yourself? How are you showing up in the studio every day? Starting to pay attention to your self-talk, like also what you're being told when someone is not pleased with you, right? That's a really great example of, are you then being diminished of your own like worth and like who you are? Or is that just like a simple like, oh, I noticed this thing and I think that this might be more helpful? Like, how are you being approached?
Hmm.
And how is that shaded or colored how you're approaching yourself? Because that's going to be like the roots of
Yeah.
why you give your agency away so easily.
Yes, absolutely. And in my own experience of tapping into that agency, I realized there's one side of it where it's so healing and beautiful and confidence building. And it's like you come back home to yourself after being dissociated. And it's awesome. But there is a side to it where it is a disruption. It can cause you to have to make very difficult decisions. It can create situations where people are unhappy with you, to say it nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you have way, way, way more experience with this than me. So I'd love to hear, when did you start caring about this so much?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, I immediately what came to mind was I have been through a lot in my life of I've been through abusive relationships. I'm a survivor of a lot of very
Mm.
difficult interpersonal um dynamics that I was born into or found myself in very young. And so I was lucky enough to get the support and the resources and the education and just the community to help me not only survive, but come through that with like a lot of learning
Mm.
about kind of like untangling what all that was and what was not okay about it. And so I've had a long journey with it, but when it came into the studio for me, um, I remember again, it was my body that told me. I just remember having this experience of being in the studio, and I'm just going to be very frank. So because this is just my experience, so I
Yeah.
have to share what it is. So would be in the studio, and the director would walk in, and this director has a style of demeaning people, embarrassing them in front of large groups in front of the room. This is that old school
Mhm.
bullying leadership style that we're talking about that is actually pretty common in sports and in ballet, and like is trying to it's needs to be reworked now, but
Mhm.
it's common. And so there very much was that style. And what I noticed over time is that when this person would come into the room, I would be, up until that point, I could be having a great class. I could be like, like one of the days where you're just like turning and you're like, yes, like everything's coordinated. Like when you are in alignment and when your body and mind feel safe, you do your best work. You have your
Absolutely.
best performance. It's just science. Like there's so much
Yeah.
research that tells us that. So I would have this experience where when I first started noticing it, it was the experience of all of a sudden like not being able to turn. And I was like, like why? And I would get mad at myself, like, why can't I just
Mhm.
ignore this? And then as I started doing trauma work, I started really understanding what my nervous system felt like. So, this subconscious system of fight, flight, or freeze that kicks in when we feel threat, that's just what happens automatically for humans. And by the way, there's not tigers around lurking anymore. So, our version of tigers and threat now has to do with social acceptance and has to do with our workplace. So if you have someone looking at you and giving you a look that says like, or ignoring you, or they just reamed you out in a meeting and then they walk in and they have this like expectation, that's a threat to
Yeah.
your nervous system and it's unsafe, right? So I felt my nervous system. So not only was I noticing that I like couldn't dance anymore, and I was like, what is this horrible like curse or spell that's happening? Like, what is like, and it made me mad because I felt like I should be able to
Yeah.
just use my technique or work harder or something, but it happened every time. And then I would feel my adrenaline and I would feel my brain start racing and fogging. I was going into flight
Yeah.
because because one, and you've got to listen to this podcast. I was just listening to it because she details it so perfectly, actually, and links it to a ballet class or sports. But
Mm.
the option to fight isn't often a good one. So, your first in your nervous system, your first line of defense is, well, fight or flight. Fight and flight are kind of even because if there's an exit, you got to get out. But
Yeah.
if there's not an exit and you're cornered, you got to fight. And then if neither of those work, you freeze. That's where dissociation comes in, actually.
Mhm.
Um, so I was trying to, in my mind, flee. I was like, my brain was like, ah! And it was just like a hijack of my body, of my mind, of my nervous system. And the research around that, which I had really started to study and learn and even do my own certifications around, I knew that that was really bad for me. Not only was I like dancing crappily in the moment and that was pissing me off, but it was physically bad for my health.
Yes.
To be inundated with all that cortisol and all that adrenaline is really bad for you,
Yeah.
especially over time, because it's meant to just be survival means
Yeah.
get out, find your way out. This is a horrible thing. Oh, now we're safe. But if you go in every single day and you're unsafe, and then you're safe, and you're unsafe, and you're safe, and you're unsafe, it's like it manifests in illness. It manifests in, like I said, injury.
Yes.
It also manifests in you losing confidence because you know what you can do, like you're like, I
Yes.
know I can turn better than this. I know that I can do this stuff. What's happening to me? So it messes with your reality as well, which is a mental health issue.
Hmm.
Um, so that's all the stuff I started noticing in my own body. And I have had the support of being in therapy with, like, I've had a really good therapist for many years now. It took me a long time to get a good match, but I just kept working and like speaking to this and talking about what was happening and doing my learning. And yeah, I think the more that I saw what you said about the disruption, the
Hmm.
more that I saw, the more difficult that it was, and it became impossible to just keep going along with those coping mechanisms
Yeah.
because I didn't want to hurt myself like that anymore. And I saw how much it was hurting everyone else too. So, I mean, disruption for the sake of your health, I gotta say is worth it.
So worth it.
And
It's
and
scary and
if we
hard,
can,
but so worth it.
it is, and it's really, really unfortunate because I still don't, I can't say that I understand. I understand on like a psychological level. If you look at like the systems that hold up these sort of bullying power structures,
Hmm.
um, it's a whole system and it's a whole cycle in and of itself. And so people don't want to disrupt the system. They because they also feel unsafe. And so there's this whole thing going on where it's like so hard to crack this and it's so hard to get people to go, hold on. We've got to learn really about this. We've got to really look at this and we've got to change. Um,
Hmm.
but that leads us to like our conversation here, where what is that system made up of? A bunch of individual people.
Yeah.
So when we come back to what we can do ourselves, there is impact in that. And I mean, then we are re-given our choice for ourselves when we really take that ownership of our own healing, of our own education, of finding whatever resources we can and just starting from where we're at. We become the new system
Yes.
eventually. So that's the hope for me. But to be really honest, it just like, it's really hard to see how slow it feels and how deeply stuck a lot of these things are
Yeah.
in like ballet culture.
It is
Yeah.
discouraging and so intimidating to look at. Like, how are we going to just overhaul this? But I do agree with
Yeah.
you. There is that hope of each person becoming more conscious and starting to do their own healing, and then hopefully being an influence for that next generation. And I do think
Yes.
we've seen change. Like, even though we can talk about this
Yes.
publicly, and I know people are going to watch this and say, yes, I agree. I've been on this journey, and I meet
Yeah.
people who are on that journey.
Yeah.
And so I know it's happening and that people are waking up to it and it's
Yes.
being more highly valued. And I even get messages from teachers sometimes on Instagram like, I really like your content. How do I do this and this and this better for my students? And I love
Yes.
to hear that 'cause it's like people
Yes.
are they're caring and it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So
Right. Because it's not about bad intentions.
no.
It never is,
Yeah.
like everybody's really doing the best they can.
Hmm.
And that is no excuse when there's all of this research and education and what we know now.
Yeah.
And we always know when we're in it too. Everyone knows. Like, and
You
but
can
not
feel
everyone,
it.
yes, but not everyone, I think, believes that there's a solution or has the resources to get themselves to a place where they feel resilient enough or resourced enough to
Mhm.
walk away from something so that they can heal, or to speak up in a place where there needs to be truth spoken into, that things are going on that are not okay.
Mhm.
And so it's really hard. It's really, really hard. So I don't blame, like, anyone.
Yeah.
And that's still not an excuse, right? Because once you have access to that knowledge, then you have a responsibility to do what you can, you
I
know.
fully believe that. Yes, yes. It's once you
Yeah.
know, you have responsibility for what you know. When you don't, okay, you just didn't know. And I
Yeah.
think it is really helpful to see with compassion, even, I mean, as tricky as this can be sometimes, like having that belief, okay, everyone is doing the best they can with what they know, even though we know they could be doing better.
Yeah.
I don't
You
know, maybe
know,
sometimes they're not, but
yeah, no, sometimes they're not. And
they're
sometimes
for sure not.
I'm so glad you said the word narcissism and brought it into the conversation because to be really honest, I think it's another piece that's really important in this conversation and in this dialogue to recognize what narcissistic behavior looks like and that there is a
Yes.
spectrum. There's a
Yes.
spectrum, especially when you introduce power.
Mhm.
We do have leaders in the ballet world that have a true narcissistic personality disorder. That
Absolutely.
is, yes,
I've
that is
researched this.
happening.
I completely agree with
Good.
you. Like, I went into it, I made a whole video years ago about
Yeah,
the, like, actually what brainwashing is and how the process works. Like,
yeah,
actually, and then also narcissism. What does that actually look like? And
yeah,
there are, yeah, like you're talking about a spectrum. There are different
yeah,
kinds, different ways it shows up. And
yeah,
it's just wild. Once you actually know what that looks like and what it is, and you can, as a dancer, put language to it, even about abuse
yes,
as well.
yes,
It gives you the ability to no longer be gaslit and gaslight yourself.
yes. So
Because
that's
you're
agency
like,
over
that's
your
what it
thoughts.
is.
Yes. So since we're talking about agency,
Yeah.
that is your agency. Got it back over your story and
Mm.
your thoughts, the story that you're telling yourself about the situation. So one thing about narcissism that I like, oh, I had this like, I will like go down these like things in my mind sometimes of like, I feel like it's like what's that Tom Cruise where he's like that movie where he's like moving all of the things. It's like very
Yes.
futuristic. I do that
Yeah.
in my head sometimes where I'm like, oh my God, this research and this book and this thing I read and this moment that happened and all of a sudden it's like jump. And I had this about narcissism the other day and I was like, we have to stop calling it something it's not. One thing in ballet that we call narcissism in leaders is we call it creative genius. It is not. It is narcissistic abuse. And we need to stop calling it that because creative genius does not require abusive behavior. But we have
True.
tied those together in the arts industries for
Mm.
so many years. And it's like, it matters what you call it. So we cannot have somebody who is unwell and treating people with great harm. We cannot be excusing that kind of behavior by saying, but that's creative genius. We also cannot say, but that's just how the ballet world is. That's another one. Um, and we also cannot minimize it and say, well, that's how I grew up and like it's just we've got to stop doing those things because then we don't address it. If we
Yes.
don't call it what it is, it's not about being like you're a monster. You're a horrible person and you should be banished. It's not about
Go
that.
to
But if
jail.
yeah, I mean, well,
I mean,
I mean, let's okay. There are some things. Like we said, there is
yeah.
a spectrum.
I realized I was just quoting this old TikTok. I don't know if you ever saw this is I'm gonna stop disrupting the important conversation in
No,
37 seconds
it's
or less.
good. It's good.
But that TikTok of the snake who's like, there's this voiceover and he's like, you wear a little sweater, go to jail. Go
Oh
to
my
jail.
God.
Put your head in a
That's
box.
from
Go to
that's from Parks and Rec. That is from the show. I love that show. That's one of the best episodes. It's so funny.
I've just been saying go to
Immediately
jail
to
for
jail.
years.
To jail. Eat from a spoon to jail. Oh God, please don't
Don't
maybe
say
cut
that,
that
but
part
like,
out. Someone might get offended. I'm gonna be canceled. Oh well. Um,
wow,
but
narcissism. Sorry.
narcissism, no, because here's the thing. I mean, people get very confused. I think supporters of ballet, donors, like people in the ballet world from all sides are trying to protect the art form. So, in the face of these issues and these problems, we've got all these tropes and all of these excuses for things that we know aren't okay. And what that's doing is making it so that we can't get the resources in there to address the issues properly. So we have to stop doing that. We have to stop making excuses and minimizing and calling it something it's not. It has nothing to do with being a genius that you also treat people like garbage. Not related. It's
No.
not. It just means that you're someone who has unaddressed issues and that for whatever your issues are and whatever your reasons are, if you're in a position of power, there needs to be resource and accountability to make sure that people are treated with respect
Yeah.
and that there's a safe environment. I mean, that's the law. I mean, regardless of like that, it's also just human decency. It's also
Yeah.
illegal to uphold creating like, um, what's it called? Not harmful work environments. It's called something legally, the like legal terminology is something. We'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
But I get really like seeing it clearly and seeing how I did that for a long time
Mm-hmm.
as well. I So when we talk about the survival system, this is a really important piece for people who've been exposed to narcissistic behavior and narcissistic abuse in systems of whatever they are, family, work, anything. Um, we have another survival response other than fight, flight, or freeze, and it's called fawn. It's
Yeah.
called fawning. And that's what a lot of, I think, dancers who, especially ones who are successful,
Mm-hmm.
that's what we learn how to do. So our nervous system goes, how do I stay in safety? And we fawn. So we do whatever we need to do to be in that person's favor. So even if we're scared, even if what we're witnessing we know is wrong and we hate watching someone else being yelled at or demeaned, or we're just like, God, that's so messed up. Like, whatever the situation is, then that person gets into the room and in front of you, your main survival mechanism often is going to be ballerina face, right? Like, what do you want me to do? Yes, 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 yes. A lot of yeses, right? When actually we are in threat in that moment because we are not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really tricky one because that's really the one that's most common with narcissism because narcissism rewards behavior like that. If you're building up the narcissistic ego and you're feeding into it and you're walking on eggshells and making sure anything you can do, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. But if you're doing that, you're safe sometimes, but you're
Yeah.
not. And so it's such like a mind something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
It sounds
but
like what some dancers call
yeah,
playing the game, kind of like making that choice.
yes,
Are you going to play the game or not? And the dancers who
yeah,
say, I wasn't willing to, I've heard them
hmm
say, I knew I made that choice and I knew I gave up this, and that like they could count the
yeah,
things they gave up because they made that choice. Um,
yeah.
what was your experience like in stepping into this sense of agency?
Yeah, you know what's really funny? I love like looking at a timeline and
Mhm.
kind of like overlaying other things that I've learned about like our processes of recovery of different, things like surviving things or whatever. And so what I've noticed is that, okay, can we be nerdy for a second and talk about like, do you know, okay, like there's a theory called polyvagal
Mhm.
theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a ladder of like polyvagal theory. So if you're stuck down in freeze and say fawning for a really long time, right? And you're just like down there, to come up the ladder, a lot of times you don't jump, right? So you might not jump
Yes.
from freeze to fawning to flight to fight to now I'm in like parasympathetic like social engagement. I've got my agency, I've got my autonomy, I'm like I'm here and I'm
Yeah.
present and my nervous system is regulated. Like you don't just jump. So
Hmm.
a lot of times people, even within a matter of seconds, will kind of like do different things on the ladder. Um, I feel like over time, I have watched myself climb up that ladder. And so I went from that freeze response of my body, like, and everything going offline, right? Like when I felt this person come in the room, when I felt unsafe, to then, like having enough like strength and rootedness within myself and maybe just enough kind of recovery within myself to know that I had a choice to move around. So this is like on a micro level, right? Because I didn't run out of the room and run to another city, but within the room, I found movement, right? Within my own body. I found like, okay, what are the small choices that I have here? I can move and stand on that side of the room. Do I feel more comfortable over there? Do I like starting to find these small pieces of agency within my environment since I didn't feel that I was able to get out of it for a very long time. Um, so I found that sort of like movement and space within myself, within it. And then I got into a point, I mean, that's one step up, and then the next rung up would be fight. And to be honest with you, I got into a space towards the end of my career where I really stepped into advocacy. I really stepped into using my voice, and I wasn't going around, kicking and screaming and punching anybody, but I was defending myself. And I found myself defending other people much more actively, it respectfully still, like not in a way that was
Yeah.
aggressive or out of my integrity, but I was definitely moving up that ladder toward a place where I could stay regulated. And to be honest with you, I had to kind of live in on that ladder a lot in that environment. When I wasn't there, I could practice regulating my nervous system. And when I was there, I could use some of those tools, but it was still not quite safe enough.
Hmm.
So now I have all these tools and I am very, very much of the time in my in a place in my nervous system where I'm not activated, where I can navigate a lot of things, but I'm also in a much safer and
Yeah.
more respectful environment now.
Hmm.
But it took a whole process to get there. And it wasn't just like it wasn't overnight.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
totally makes sense. And I've talked with a lot of dancers who, like, through our coaching, for some of them, they can find what you're talking about within the environment they're currently in. For some, the most empowered choice is to speak up. For some, it's to leave because
Yeah.
environment is huge. Like, that's totally worth underlining. And I just really want dancers to listen to all this and just hear from us like, you're not crazy.
You're
If
right.
you've experienced
Mhm.
any of the symptoms of what you were sharing, I mean, when you were talking about what was happening inside of your body, you
Yeah.
pretty much described my second year at the Houston Ballet Academy. I fell apart and I was like, what's wrong with me? There's something wrong with
Oh.
me. I'm not able to handle this. I must be weak. I I
Oh.
just didn't know about this stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm sure this is like really healing and encouraging for some dancers to listen to. Like, it is not
100%.
your fault that you're experiencing that. And it's actually a very
Mhm.
normal reaction to have to
Yeah.
environments like that. Sometimes you can take those baby steps, like you were sharing about in your own journey, to start to find that
Hmm.
agency. Sometimes it just kind of seems like there's a cap on how
Yeah.
far you can explore that with
Yeah.
a certain environment because it just really is not safe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I think
that's
that it's so multifaceted. I think the body and our relationship to our bodies has a big part in this, especially as dancers and what we're told about our bodies from, it's like we like disembody ourselves and think that like we treat our bodies as a machine instead of like, this is me.
Yeah.
This is Melody. I am my body.
Yeah.
But we are sort of taught to dehumanize ourselves in that
Yeah.
way. And so it's yeah, there's no blame, but it's just like looking at what we're working with. So I think reconnection with the body is a really important piece. But what you were saying, like you said that the story that came up in your mind was that you were weak, right? This is
Oh,
all,
yeah.
I'm not strong enough to hang or whatever.
Mhm.
And I really think that like the stories and having someone, I don't know how everybody gets it. Mine was a mix of, like I said, self-education, reading books, reading
Yeah.
research, um, kind of immersing myself in communities that were looking at trauma in systems and healing from trauma, having a therapist that could speak a different story, that could hear my spin, right? Like if I would have walked in with your story and said, like, I just must be weak, her being like,
Hmm.
or what if,
Yeah.
what if this? And just like allowing there to be again space for a different story, letting that sit with me, and then feeling like what feels true to me, what story feels better in my body. And it's the opposite of gaslighting yourself. Actually,
Yeah.
like some people I had literally heard verbatim when I started my healing journey, I was told, well, don't be too gentle with yourself, as if that was the threat, as if me learning to be more compassionate toward myself would be a threat. That's very interesting as a perspective because it's actually the opposite of that, right? Like the more space we have to consider, oh, maybe I'm not like a horrible person because I slept through my alarm and I missed class today. Or, maybe that doesn't mean I'm a complete like waste of space in the ballet studio or whatever, like really cruel
Yeah.
things pop up in our heads, or we're told the space to have a different story about that is everything.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I overslept my alarm because I'm exhausted. My body is telling me I need more rest. Oh my God. All these shows we've been doing, I haven't had much recovery time. I remember the athletic trainer saying that, oh, yeah, dancers don't really work in a way where they get enough recovery time. Maybe my body is just trying to help keep me preserved.
Yes.
How about that as a story? Instead of it
Absolutely.
being, like a moral failure, but we have to, I don't know, we have to get new stories as
Mhm.
options in our
Yeah.
minds to kind of work through our days with. So there's something really important about that too.
I could not agree more. Yeah, because I think one big way that these traumatic events live on and go on to affect years and years and years of our lives is in the quick conclusion our brain just naturally draws according to the intense emotion that we experience at the time. Whether it's for me, a big subconscious belief I wasn't even aware of consciously for
Mm,
years that came from
hmm.
one of the hardest times in my life in ballet was I can't trust myself. And it started to
Mm,
manifest in the weirdest ways. Like I couldn't pick up choreography anymore. And I used to be
yeah,
so good at it. And I
yeah,
am really good at it when I
yeah.
leave. I'm like, man, maybe I
Believe you.
but
Yes.
I was so like in that deep stress and dissociation that I was like, I guess I can't trust myself. And I guess,
No.
like I said,
Yeah.
I'm weak and I'm just not tough enough for this. I can't handle it like everyone else seems to be handling it. I didn't even know what
Mm,
they were going through, you know?
yeah.
But yeah, and so it's really healing and powerful, like you were talking about, to not only have with yourself, that curiosity to just witness,
Mhm.
what am I feeling?
Yeah.
What is the story I'm telling myself? Where did that come from? What
Yeah.
could be a different conclusion?
Mhm.
A story that maybe is not only kinder to myself, but more true. Like when I go
Yeah.
through that, when I coach dancers, with the really cool thing is when we start to revisit things from the past and talk about what belief came from that experience that you had. What's
Mm.
so cool is when we start to reframe the story on that situation, we actually restore it to truth, whereas the belief was the distortion. Which
Right.
is so cool. We're not just choosing a different reframe that makes you feel all
Right.
cute, fuzzy about yourself.
Right.
It's literally true that,
True.
like, in my
Yeah.
past, the truth was is that I am a very intelligent person and I'm very resilient and I'm very capable and totally, I have absolute permission to trust myself and reason to do so. That's the truth. But the distortion was that I couldn't, which made emotional sense at the time.
Right.
That's what's so powerful about like observing those stories and also having people like the therapist to listen compassionately, be that compassionate witness and give
Yeah.
you the space to start to change the story.
Yeah. I mean, the other compassionate witness is your body.
Yeah,
And
it's cool.
they, he keep the score. And so,
Yeah.
one thing that came to mind when you were saying, like, one of the most powerful things that I heard or read, or probably both, about this threat response, again, so you were saying like there was a lot of self-blame in you,
Mhm.
like, right, there's something wrong with me,
Yeah.
making yourself the problem, lack of trust that like robs you of your trust in yourself. That again is such a hallmark of narcissistic abuse because with narcissism, there's no ability. We can even call it emotional immaturity, okay? Like it,
Mhm.
because it's on a scale. You have someone who emotionally cannot take accountability for their own
Yes.
mistakes. They cannot admit that they make mistakes. They embrace their own humanity. What they do is they make everything your fault. Your fault, your fault, your fault. It couldn't be my fault, right? And so we learn through that conditioning that we are the threat, right? So maybe we feel scared when they enter the room, but we have believed the story for so long that they're mad because of something we did,
Yeah.
that then our bodies don't trust us because we're like, and oh,
That-
I knew that was gonna happen. It's so hard.
Beep.
Yeah, just beep, just use
I
a
love it
beep.
when like
Oh my
videos
God.
beep something out, but they actually miss the word. So it's like the word beep afterwards.
Yeah, sorry.
It's fine.
Uh, so, but that was profound for me to learn because I also struggled a lot with self-trust. And that is still my number one priority of what I strive for is to establish trust with myself, like reestablish and prove to myself that I can trust myself. Um, and so I think that's an important thing to realize that you didn't get that idea yourself. You were conditioned to be blamed for someone else's feelings that they're not owning,
That's
and
nuts.
therefore it turns you into your own threat, and you're not. That's where it's just a lie, but where our brains are trying to just keep us safe.
Yeah. Dang.
Yeah.
Wow. This is so important. And I wish like everyone out there would be talking about this and listening to it and engaging in this conversation and then in this work. I'm
Yeah.
very curious to finish on what dancers can do with this information. And the kind of dancer I'm
Mhm.
thinking about right now, though you're welcome to share for anyone you want to talk to, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking about dancers who are aspiring professionals or very early professional dancers,
Yeah.
like early on in their career.
Yeah.
Those tend to be the populations that feel like they literally can't afford to speak up and implement these
Yes.
ideas because
Yeah.
they're like, I literally just have to do anything
Yeah.
because I'm disposable. That's or replaceable. If
Yeah.
that's, I've heard it literally spoken before. If it's not actually explicitly said, that is often the undertone
Yeah.
in those spaces. So what would you encourage them to do?
Go buy the book, The Wisdom of Your Body by Dr. Hilary McBride.
I'm writing it
It-
down.
um, Follow her work. Um, Check out her Instagram. Um, and it is free to reestablish your relationship with your body, to read that book, learn about what kind of stories you tell yourself about your body, learn about how much you're in your mind and how much you're not in your body, even though you're a dancer. And I think that dancers have a really, this is my dog. Say hi, Eleanor. um, I think dancers have an advantage because we are highly like we have like a high body intelligence. I think kind of in general, I hear a lot of massage therapists and physical therapists and stuff talking about that. Like dancers are so like high body intelligent people.
Yes.
They're so aware of their bodies. And we have
And
this all the things that we've been talking about in this conversation, and we're disconnecting and we are overriding with our minds and doing these incredible things with our bodies. And in some places, instead of listening to our bodies, we are telling our bodies. And our bodies are highly attuned and trained, so they respond. But my one thing to say is your body will never, ever, ever lie to you, ever.
hmm,
You might be like, I'm feeling this thing and I freaked out and I don't know what it is, and that could be an experience, or getting in tune with your body can be quite an experience if you've been shut down from that. Yeah, it's not like roses, although some of it can be.
no.
But if you commit to listening to your body and trusting your body and kind of allowing your body to show you what your body has known all of this time, how your body has felt in these rooms all of this time. And you have the proper kind of like container for that. That's why I said buy this book.
Mhm.
You can do a lot by having a dance party in your room, by allowing, like, let your body talk to you.
Yeah.
I know that sounds woo woo, but there is so much wisdom in our bodies. And there's a lot of undoing. It's like a subversive act simply to connect with your body and like offer like, okay, so the second book would be Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. But simply to offer your body like a compassionate witness of like, I don't
Yeah.
know, an injury or how it feels, or like my neck is tight. What do I actually need right now? Like, is there emotion there? There's just so much that your body has to tell you, and it's truth.
Oh,
And I honestly think like that's a really solid starting point for anybody.
yeah, you're so right. Because it sounds like this approach also encourages dancers to start seeing their body, like I've said many times, as a teammate, not an enemy.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah, it's such a simple perspective shift, but it really helps you to open up that line of communication and to respect it for what it says and to really appreciate like how beautiful is it that even though sometimes the experiences we have in our bodies, the feelings that come up are unpleasant, as much as I can,
Yeah.
I'd like to use the word unpleasant, not negative, because even if like anxiety is wildly unpleasant, it's giving you
Mm-hmm.
some really valuable information. It's
Yes.
asking you to
Yeah.
listen. I heard one podcaster say, emotions are like visitors. They keep on knocking at your door until you let them in.
Mm-hmm.
And when you actually do, it's like, wow, you can come back into connection with yourself and also self-honesty. That honesty with yourself where you practice, and it takes courage, I think, for a lot of dancers. That's what I've seen. Like, it takes so
Yeah.
much courage to be radically honest with yourself about what you feel, what you think,
Yeah.
what you believe, what you're scared of, all these
Yeah.
things, what you want, everything. But once you
Yeah.
do, there might be some uncomfortable things that your body is asking you to face.
Yeah.
But it's asking you that because it wants you to thrive,
Yes.
which is
And
so
the
cool.
on a like it's very cool. And on a more it's not even more shallow because if you love dance and you're pursuing some kind of career in it, you want to be able to achieve your absolute best.
Mhm.
This is how.
Yeah.
If you are disembodied, you will not dance your best. If you're disconnected from your body cannot show up with all of like the amazingness of what our bodies can do. And my dancing improved exponentially the more connected I became with my body. There are things that like I had sort of been like, oh, I don't know. I guess I just like lost that I understand how dancing works and I can teach and coach better because of that now. Because
Wow.
because I can listen to my own body and your body isn't mine and it might feel totally different, but I have an embodied way of speaking to you about a correction
Mm.
now instead of just from like a mental, like sort of, we can strategize, but how does it feel?
Yes.
You know? And
Yes.
so it's really valuable to your dancing too. not, not that, not that that is separate from what we're talking about, but a lot of people are like, I just want to be the best dancer I can be. You're gonna need to connect to your body to do
Oh,
that.
true. Yes. Real
Yeah.
quick, before we wrap up, we've used the term embodied a lot. Would you mind saying what you mean by that, just so dancers are clear?
Yeah. Um, so I feel like there are a lot of different
Mhm.
definitions for that term. My dog is licking the couch so much right now. Sorry. I don't know if you can hear that.
That's all
She's
right. My
embodied with
cat
her
licks
tongue
my
licking the couch.
socks, and it's
Oh,
like I can't imagine that that's nice, but she must want to do it because she keeps doing it.
yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
My
he
dog
likes
likes licking
it.
the couch cushions. I'm like,
So
okay.
weird.
Yeah, it's weird. Um, so what I understand embodiment to be and to mean is, and this is going to sound so like, Melody, you didn't give a definition, but it is our experience of being in this world as a body. That, I mean, that is what it is to be embodied,
Mhm.
is to like understand your own experience as a a body. And I
Yeah.
know that that's so simple, um, but in our in our culture, we focus a lot on the mind. You know, we put
Yes.
a lot of value on intellect and on just like the mind. We worship it, and your mind is actually, guess what? It's still my body. And so we think they're separate and they're not. And we think we are separate. We talk about our body as an it, which is so interesting. So
Yeah.
embodiment is really understanding yourself as a person, as a body, and what that means. And I would say my own definition of that is of like giving your body valid voice, like giving your own body permission to speak to you and for you to listen. Because I think when we're disembodied, we're often having a one-way conversation,
Mhm.
you know, with our bodies. Like our mind is like dictating. We're a dictatorship of this body, how what we want it to do, and you're sick. I don't like that. You're no, you know, like
Shut up.
more pills to shut up. Shut up, body. So disembodiment is shut up, body. And embodiment is I'm listening to you, body. And what you have to say
I
is very
like that.
important.
That is good. Yeah, I've heard it talked about like you're embodied when, for example, if you want to embody confidence,
Mm.
the feeling of confidence is something it's a level of being and feeling rather than thinking and acting.
Mm.
So whatever it is that you want to embody, it's coming more from the core and a state of being rather than putting something on, which kind of makes you a shell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think music is a great way to sort of access the the body because there's like movement happening all the time in our bodies, whether it's like our internal organs, it's our blood flow, our breath. You can go to lots of different like traditions of mindfulness or meditation or Eastern medicine or whatever, where it will talk to or speak to the wisdom of that.
Yeah.
But in Western culture, we don't talk about it as much, right? And so there is this like movement that's happening all the time. And I think for a lot of people, music or some type of like free or like mindful movement where like you're moving and kind of listening to what's happening and being curious can be really helpful, especially for dancers.
Yes.
Because we move in such a structured way
True.
that yeah, that like mindful movement where you like do a movement meditation or just a dance party. It's just a fancy way of having like a little dance party with yourself and kind of being like, ugh, I didn't need to shake something off today or whatever, I think it's really helpful.
That's
I
awesome.
struggle with meditation where I'm just like sitting totally still. I get very like, I'm wiggly.
Yeah. That's why I
Yeah.
like walks. I like get really crunchy. I like touch some leaves and crap. I'm like, I'm gonna be in nature.
Yes. Oh my God. Nature. That's, yep.
So good.
Yes. Yes.
I just touched my plant back here. Oh,
Yeah.
perfectly regulated. Kidding.
Yep. Yep.
That'd be
No,
cool.
that is so real. That is
There's
so
truth to
real.
that. Well, you're so amazing. And I don't say that. That sounds like such a throwaway, but truly, you have so much wisdom. And I'm so grateful that we had this conversation and that just more people get to hear about all these conclusions and pieces of wisdom that you've gotten to develop within yourself because of your experience and how thoughtful and conscious you've been throughout all that. So thank you for sharing it. I
Thanks,
know that
Kirsten.
people listened and just felt so seen and known and encouraged, hopefully, through this. So
I
thank
hope
you
so.
much.
Thank you too.
Yeah, any last things or words or resources or whatever you want to say?
I no, I mean those I feel like those two are kind of my top two. There's so much out there if you just, there's a rabbit hole you can go down, but
True.
um yeah, I think educating ourselves, it's so easy on like social media and stuff now to we're like taking in so much information and digesting it.
Yeah.
And so I even think you could probably learn a lot about this on social media.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot that we can do to educate ourselves around these things and kind of like be digesting that instead of it's just very, very easy to use that as another way to kind of numb out. And there's, I don't know, even if it's just a little bit every day, I think that there's a lot out there with a lot of good information on this. So
Yes.
there.
That is good. Thank you, Melody. Wait, I'm going to
Thank
bring back an
you.
Easter egg from last time. Thank you so
Oh
much.
my gosh, these are feet.
Of course.
You understand that these are feet, right? Oh,
Well,
thank you so much,
thank
Kirsten. It was
you.
great to talk with you again.
Yes.